Hi, welcome back, everyone. Great to be back. I hope everyone enjoyed the morning sessions as well. As we kick off our afternoon session focusing on redesigned workspaces, just a quick reminder that Stream1 is also available through the link on your screen. And please feel free to send over your questions for all the panelists that will be discussed at the end of the session. We start off another great session here. Very relevant topic with Bindu Dhaliwal. Is this the change opportunity we have been waiting for? Reviewing some of the persistent challenges and regarding company culture and policies. Extremely relevant in these times, unprecedented times we find ourselves in. And Bindu, it'd be great, given your background, to hear your insights, but also the line of questioning you'll take with your panelists. So without further delays, let's kick this off. Over to you, Bindu, from BMO Financial Group, and you're responsible for the enterprise whistleblower program there, with final escalation of customer complaints. And at BMO, you've also held a variety of legal positions in areas of wealth management, corporate affairs, and commercial law. And prior to your most recent appointment, you were on the bank's sustainability team. And actually, now over to you.
Thanks, Kari. Well, welcome everyone. And as Kari mentioned, this afternoon's discussion is really going to look at whether the pandemic really changed things, and was it the opportunity for companies, and particularly this sector, to change their policies and programs when it came to their employees and transformation. So we've got some great panelists with us today. I'm going to first introduce Jennifer Collins, who's the CEO of Hazel and Collins Associates, a boutique management consultancy delivering transformative leadership and cultural programs. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you so much. It's so lovely to be here. Thanks, Bindu.
And we also have Joshua Varghese, who is the VP and Portfolio Manager at CI Investments, who specializes in real estate investment management for the Signature Global Asset Management Investment Team at CI. Welcome, Josh.
Thanks a lot. Excited for this.
Both Jennifer and Josh have got great bios and a lot of relevant experience, so I'd really encourage everyone to go check out their bios on the website. But in the interest of time, we're going to start. And so I'm really interested in hearing your perspectives, because I think when I look at this, the financial services industry and the sector, and there were a lot of companies that had work from home policies before, flex arrangements, technology, they were investing in technology. And so the question is, with so many people now working from home in light of the pandemic, is this, is this a state of doing a lot more just for a short time period, or is this really going to be a change? Is it time for a change? Mm-hmm. And Jennifer, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Happy to do that one. Can I just answer with one word? Yes. I think, companies have changed. They have changed because the priorities of their people, their stakeholders, and in some cases, their investors have changed. The employee experience has changed. The pandemic and the social justice movement has really reshaped the minds, the hearts, and even the soul of our societies. Companies, their culture is driven by the values, the beliefs, and the priorities of the people that walk in every day. And if we've gone through change, then our companies have too. How we experience the pandemic is now going to shape the way we lead, the decisions we make, and what we prioritize. And, I truly believe as well, this is not something that we can rewind. We are changed. Companies have changed. And embracing that as an organization is actually what will propel us into a more exciting after post-pandemic way of being.
So Josh, do you agree? Yes, no, maybe so?
Yeah, no, I think it's completely changed. And I think it was, there was a lot of this change kind of building up in the background, but until it was widely adopted, you weren't really going to have it permeate through the culture of an organization anytime soon. And so an example is pre-pandemic, a lot of companies were allowing work from home and remote working and all this stuff. Not everybody took advantage of it. And I think there was still a bit of a stigma there that if you were one of the minority that did take advantage of it, that there was maybe this, prevailing belief that you weren't working as hard as everybody else. And then the second thing was, if not everybody has adopted to this new norm, like pre-COVID, and you had a few people working remotely and some people not, you don't have a widespread adoption of the appropriate technologies that are needed to really let an organization function in this setup. So what happened during COVID is that all of a sudden everybody is forced to live this new life and work this new type of work. And so we saw a lot of old school thinkers who previously wouldn't get engaged in the relevant technology forced to get on it. So now we've got everybody in our organization using Microsoft Teams, and it's an amazing platform for us all to stay connected. I don't see how that rewinds, and I think the culture and the beliefs of an organization have shifted to be more accepting of this type of setup. I think that it was a long time in the making for work-life balance to be a really important thing to employees, and now it's widely accepted. And I don't think you can just go and change that.
And so, Jennifer just talked about, and so did you, in terms of this culture shift, and it's needing to happen, but it is really happening sort of at the executives and senior level. And sort of as an investor, as being part of the investment space, how is that important to you?
As an investor, what we're looking to do is invest in companies that can get us returns that are above average, both in aggregate and within their respective industries. So, there's the obvious ones. If you've got a better business than the average, you're going to perform better. But let's say you're in the same industry, in the same business as the average. What's going to set you apart? And what we're looking for are companies that can increase their corporate value, and value can be defined as free cash flow in the most simple terms to investors. And so how does a company get extra free cash flow over and above their peers? Well, culture really comes into that. When you think of an organization's cost structure, we talk about what's going to happen with work from home and what that means to office space demand. Well, you think about office space, the average rent that a corporation is paying is about 1/10 of the amount that they're paying in payroll. So you really want to make sure that a company is spending efficiently on its people. And what that also means is that you need a company that's going to minimize turnover, minimize disruption to their business in times of pain like COVID. And in times of thriving, they have the right workforce that's energized to hit their goals and help the company achieve what it's going to achieve. And that is something actually tangible that you can calculate. And so, there's a ton of research on what culture means to an organization and what that means to financial returns of that organization. And it's something that actually means something to an investor, because you can actually find good returns out of companies that embrace this.
So you have all these people now, or a large number of people. I think in Canada, PwC had a study where 64% of employees in various sectors have gone to work remote or from home or wherever. And I think in the financial services sector, especially for companies that don't have customer-facing roles, that's probably even larger. And so how do you keep these people engaged, and how do you have them connected other than through MS Teams, and sort of move the work product and everything, going forward on an ongoing basis? Because this has also been a lot longer than I think people anticipated in March. I think in March we were all like, this is going to be a few months, and then in the summer we're back in the offices, but that hasn't happened. So Jennifer, wondering if you could, I know this is an area that you specialize in, so wondering if you could touch upon that a little bit.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'm going to tie this back to something that Josh just said too, and it's the sort of the connection of culture to the business imperatives in an organization. So, bottom line, whether you're trying as an organization to increase your average returns or increase corporate value, whether you're focusing on strategies that drive CSI, ESG, SRI, whatever it is, you do that. Being able to do that is directly impacted by the culture of the organization. Your culture essentially is the key to enabling or inhibiting success. And I'm not saying that a business can't achieve its drivers without deeply understanding its culture, but I am definitely asserting that organizations who want to grow their business and optimize their results inevitably come to the realization that they need to look inward and understand what's going on with their people. And then getting to your point, how do we keep people focused and engaged and energized? How do we keep them coming back to their screens every day when they're distracted by all new distractions that we actually haven't built coping skills or mechanisms to manage? And organizations that did well through this pandemic, senior executive leaders were much more accessible. Hierarchy went out the window. Communication and direction was clear. People in the organization felt a common purpose around working through something together, achieving desired results together, and supporting each other's well-being throughout. So I think that as executive leaders start to shift their minds to, I'm afraid to say, away from our people's well-being to how do we be sustainable in 2021? What are our new strategies? I think we have to still meet our people where they're at. Remember how well we did by communicating, creating clarity, having common purpose and direction to keep people focused and engaged, and knowing how they were directly impacting the bottom line strategy of the org.
I think that's a great point on the common problem that everybody came together to try to solve early on to this pandemic. And I think it's the reason why you're hearing executives flip-flopping on their opinions of working remotely versus working from home, because early on in the pandemic, everybody's working towards the same goal. Everybody's super productive. And, then what happens through the summer when the weather gets nicer, people are sick of being locked down. Nothing's really changed much about how they operate as an organization in terms of how their changing needs are being addressed. And so I think it's kind of quite obvious that productivity is going to slip during that period. And so if you're, if you are the leader of an organization and took the early on pandemic environment as your base case for how things are to operate from here, then you're in a tough spot because you're actually not putting in the right measures to ensure that your employees are engaged beyond this. Even now is not really reflective of how things are going to be from here because we're living in a lockdown, in a pandemic, and we haven't even hit the winter season yet. So then what happens when you have to deal with people's mental health issues from not being able to get outside, and what does that do to their productivity? So I don't know what the answer is. I think that a lot of time has to be spent thinking about it, though.
Mm-hmm.
And so, Josh, you brought up a great point about the productivity aspect. I think that's something that is going to be really top of mind to a lot of senior leaders, particularly with the current economic state. But it's interesting. I also, recently read an article about the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, who said, what he's concerned about is without people being in the office, there's going to be a lack of innovation, or what he called creative combustion. So I think that's also, an aspect of productivity is one thing, what you're doing, you need to get it done. But what do you say to this aspect piece about innovation and the lack of creative combustion, and how that's really going to be lost if people aren't physically together?
I think it really depends on the job function that you're talking about. So if you look at an organization, like a large one like JP Morgan, tens of thousands of employees, how many of them actually really need to be innovative in their job? And how many are doing a lot of tasks that are a little bit more repetitive and could be more redundant? Actually, that's another question that I would love to get into if we get a chance, is, what is the need, coming out of this, what is that going to mean for needs of personnel in general? When I talk about things like, rent only being 1/10 of what personnel costs are, what happens as organizations take a look and actually can measure productivity because they can actually see the input of employees, what happens there? But what I will say is that finance industry is, we're all in, a lot of us are in finance at this conference, but finance is not going to lead the way in terms of defining culture. And the reason why I think that is because it's a legacy business run with a legacy mindset that's now trying to catch up and think about where to go from here. You've got a whole new entrant that's come in the last 2 decades, and that's big tech. I would follow them to figure out what they're doing. And you've got groups like Facebook, Amazon, Twitter, etc., that are really embracing the remote work culture and are finding that there are ways to encourage employees to stay engaged.
And Jennifer, any thoughts on that point?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think a crisis, when people hit crisis, whether it's a mass pandemic or a smaller crisis that keeps people at work for a quick 24-hour period, we rally, right? And it tends to be, you see a lot of organizations, they jump in, they all hands on deck, hear a lot of executive and senior teams saying, we're great in a crisis. This is a long one. And I think, as I think we're all acknowledging here, the enthusiasm for collaboration and innovation has kind of settled a bit. And I think companies are realizing that that voluntary all hands on deck is starting to wane. My belief is traditional means, command and control, hierarchy, bureaucracy, standing shoulder to shoulder, as was in the quote, it doesn't have the same reach anymore. So instead, we have to rely on sort of a combination of both hard and soft incentives to motivate internal and external collaborators. And, to Josh's point, we're still trying to figure out how do we do that, because we haven't been at a static point yet where we can actually sit down and say what is going to be needed into 2021. But companies do need to identify and respond to their people and partners' true motivations around collaboration and innovation if they do want it to continue moving forward. If it's not being shoulder to shoulder, what is it that's going to motivate you to be here and innovate?
I also think it's going to, every company is going to be different in terms of where it's at in its life cycle. So, I'm at CI Investments. We're a pretty big organization with a bunch of people that have worked together for a long time. It's super easy to work remotely because I can call anybody in the organization and know that I know them well, and that we're going to be able to collaborate. I don't necessarily need to be face-to-face with them every day. It's much different if you're trying to build a new business and you're trying to grow and you're trying to get to know your employees. Your view on your needs for that physical engagement might be completely different.
And I imagine, Josh, even if you're an established organization, but you have a segment of new employees coming in or a group of new employees, it's that connectivity, right? So I guess it's the age and stage of employees as well.
Mm-hmm. And that's a great point. And when I think to our organization and what has led in the past, what has led employees to really feel like part of the culture, to me, it hasn't actually been the in-office time. It's been the out-of-office, off-site stuff, whether it be, group retreats or after-work drinks, like things where you can actually really get to know a person so that when you're dealing with them in the office or on the phone or on Zoom, you've got a really comfortable rapport. I think, one of my suspicions is that companies are going to have to beef up that off-site team building and not think that the office environment is the only place to foster those relationships. I don't think it is.
Yeah. I think connection, like if there's any word that's resonating for me through this whole part of the conversation, is the importance of connection. And if we're not connected in place, I think of examples like micro recognition, walking by someone, giving them a nod, saying, hey, great job this morning, saw you in that presentation. It's not happening anymore. Micro recognition has gone out the window. So intentionally creating systems and process for increased connection, whether it's by providing people with great digital connectivity, designing offsites, virtual offsites, utilizing different tools, but also not overwhelming people with it. And we have to acknowledge that not everybody's in the same place. Some people are there. They feel good. They're loving this. And other people are feeling isolated and very, very stressed and just very not comfortable on camera. Just an interesting time on that.
Yeah, like I totally agree there with Jennifer on needing to get more innovative on creating that connectivity. Like Microsoft Teams and those types of platforms are great, but they're probably, we're probably in the very early innings of where it can get to. And I think on the technology side, we're probably going to have to take some lessons from young millennials and Gen Z who have grown up on digital connectivity and seeing what we can take from that to the corporate culture, minus the dancing videos, and seeing what we can incubate and create in terms of that connectivity.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to probe a little bit on the different sectors or groups that that the financial sector can learn from, because I agree with you, Josh. It's a pretty established, and some places could even be bureaucratic. And so, Jennifer, your thoughts on, Josh mentioned big tech, Facebook, etc., millennials, Gen Zs. Any thoughts on those, or digging deeper in somewhere else?
No, you know what? I'm always surprised, I think, what organizations are leading the charge and which organizations actually practice a lot of culture transformation and change. And startups, millennial generation, tech, fintech, or highly competitive culture, certainly you would suggest that if they're in a highly competitive space, they're having to be innovative, they're having to evolve. Yet at the same time, I would say it comes from interesting places. So I would look at organizations that are very much focused on have a focus on ESG, have a focus on people and culture, like really clear initiatives driving people and culture. Those organizations probably have a very good understanding about how this pandemic has impacted their culture and how it will directly impact their strategy. I think we could learn from that. Even around technology, right? Not just the people side of things, but looking at people and culture to understand how organizations will thrive, build new strategy.
Before we head up to questions, I just wanted to ask you both about what's this going to look like when the pandemic's over? We presumably and hopefully will get to a state where we're not in lockdown perpetually. And so are we all, I hear both of you saying, that this is here to stay, but does this mean that there's a rotation into the office? There is no office. It's a mix. Or what could it possibly look like, both from the physical space, but also from the way that people work? Is MS Team and Zoom and stuff is going to be the biggest thing that people are going to rely on? Just thoughts, and because I really appreciated the comment being made about we're in a specific time right now where people are locked down or somewhat locked down. And when that opens up, even working from home is going to be very different, or working remotely. Mm-hmm. So either one of you, whoever wants to start first.
Sure. I'll go ahead first. I think that in the leading organizations, I think we could see 9 to 5 being thrown out the window, and organizations recognizing that people in our lives are fluid, and the expectation that you have to be in front of your bosses during a specified time frame, and that's the only time frame that you can be productive, I think is out. I do think that we do kind of desire connectivity, and not just digitally. Like, we want to be in front of people, and we want to get to know the people that we work with. And so I think that there's a real role for physical office space. I think it's just going to be different than what it was. I think that people are going to continue to value their ability to be flexible, and they're not going to want to be forced to be in an office environment just because that's how things were done. But I think that comes with a lot of implications. I think the makeup of what an office actually looks like is going to have to change. There's a lot of office stock that it's very commodity. It's not very inspiring. There's nothing, they're not designed for collaboration, actually. I think that's going to have to change. But I think what we're going to come to is a world where flexibility rules, really. And I think if organizations don't do that, there will be organizations that do. And then there's going to be, then it's going to be a war for talent. In terms of who can provide the most holistic environment that encourages productivity for their workers. Now, I'll add one last thing. I don't think that happens right away, because I think right now the balance of power is actually going to be in the hands of the organizations, because there's a lot of out of work people right now. We're in a weak economy, and organizations are figuring out that they can be more productive with less people. So I think that the organizations are going to have that power, but I do think there are going to be certain organizations that recognize the value of, or the implications of this whole culture shift.
Yeah.
So Jennifer, your thoughts before we actually have some questions in the queue, but I'd like to hear your thoughts before we go there.
Will people go back? Will we be hybrid? Will we work from home? All of it, I think. I think different organizations will do different things because of different financial pressures. I might say, I think we have to remember that most organizations did a remarkable job increasing innovation, collaboration, and employee engagement through the pandemic. And before we forget about everything we did well, and this new employee experience we created, we would do well to really consider what is it that we want to sustain moving forward, because it will positively impact us as we pivot into this post-pandemic leadership. I strongly recommend that my clients measure and diagnose the cultural impact of the past, 6-8 months, to better understand how they lead their desired culture moving forward. And then, that's the other thing. Leaders now, we need to be highly skilled, guys. Like, as leaders, we need to be strong in how we lead people and also strong in how we lead results and strategy. We need to look at our system structure and process, all those legacy things, and ask ourselves, are these going to enable or inhibit us moving forward? What got us here won't get us there. And last piece too is, with the breakdown of hierarchy and bureaucracy, which is great, I think organizations are now struggling with systems for accountability. And holding people accountable and fostering that type of culture. So I do think that that's really important moving forward.
Well, great. No, thank you both for your comments. So we've got a few interesting questions. So I'm going to just ask for very quick responses. I'm going to pick sort of who goes. But on that point, Jennifer, here's an interesting question. Do you think that adapting, do we need to wait for a new generation of executives and C-suites, board members, before we can actually move forward in some of this, sort of making this a more permanent change?
Gosh, we can't wait. We can't wait. No change, no ROI. I do think we're going to have a very interesting new executives coming into the marketplace. I think we should pay attention and be asking our incoming leaders about what this experience has taught them and how it will shape their leadership moving forward. But I don't, no matter how old you are, no matter what generation you're from, we wouldn't be in leadership roles if we didn't have the ability to change. So it's just, all of us have to accept that we need to change. We can't wait.
So, Josh, I'm going to combine two questions together. So, people are asking, is it, maybe adapting to remote working was the easy part. Is it going to be harder to reintegrate people back into the workforce, particularly those who do not want to, either travel on trains or, travel back? Or whatnot, and are comfortable with working from home? Will that be a challenge?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point and a good question. One thing is getting people back into the office. The other is, do they want to be back, and what happens if they're not? And it will be a challenge. And even at our own organization, we're seeing surveys come out, and I'll give big props to our company. They're really trying to figure out what employees want to do, and it's a smaller number that want to be back in the office. Now, again, part of it is a timing thing. We're in the middle of a pandemic, so everybody's risk alert is ultra heightened. So companies can't just wait for that moment where everybody wants to come back to the office. It may or may not happen. They got to figure out, how do we deal with the hand that we're dealt, which is, how do we keep people engaged if they come back and if they don't? And I think you might be waiting a really long time if you're just waiting for that day that you can open your offices fully again.
Yeah.
Okay, I think this is our last question, and it's about employee mental health. Maybe it wasn't on employers' radars as much as before, but it's clearly an issue in light of life, work, and is this something that employers are going to make a priority and focus when talking about culture and what they support? Jennifer, maybe you can.
You know what? I'll do this. I'll support anyone who's feeling that by validating it and saying Barrett Culture Center did a global pandemic survey to ascertain how people are feeling through the pandemic. And it came back clear as a bell that one thing that has increased in organizations is feeling of isolation, stress, and anxiety. So, mental health is a real issue, and it's even more prominent issue now, because not only are we feeling stressed, anxious, and isolated, but our coping mechanisms for dealing with mental health, those have either gone away, shifted, or changed. So if we circle all the way back to, for an organization to be profitable, to have above average returns, to increase corporate value, to achieve its strategy is based on the skill, talent, focus, and potential of its people, then yes, right? We need to take care of the mental health of our people. So they'll be around to achieve that potential and to get excited about moving the organization forward.
Josh, do you have any thoughts on that piece about employees focusing on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's super important, and it's something that should have been a focus a long time ago. And back to the title of this
yes.
panel, like, is this the change? Is this what sparks the change that is needed? And I think it's going to depend on the organization. It's going to depend on the empathy of the managers. But back to what we were talking about in terms of what employee satisfaction means for productivity and eventually financial returns, there is an economic reason to make sure that this becomes addressed. So I don't think every organization is going to do it. But I think you will see, like, a lot of good ones really start to focus on it more.
Sorry, go ahead, Jennifer.
Oh, I was just going to say, it's so interesting. When it does come to culture, you can actually measure what we call it entropy. It's the amount of friction, frustration, or drag in an organization. It's where you're bumping into someone who's fully engaged and someone who's feeling frustrated by these restricting systems or process. And you can put a dollar on it. Like, you can actually put a dollar on the amount of money walking out the door from friction, frustration, systems and structures that are not enabling the organization. Anyway.
No, and I really appreciate what you said, Jennifer, because I think employees are going to start demanding it to a certain extent, and those who aren't comfortable with however their employee is going to sort of move on and go somewhere else. But I hadn't appreciated the ability to value that piece. So that's been really interesting. This has been a really great conversation. I wanted to appreciate both of you for sharing your insights. I think what I have learned is that the change is here to stay. What the change will look like is going to be very different depending on how people adapt and when people adapt. And some organizations are going to take more time. So I wanted to thank Jennifer and Josh for all your time and all your wisdom you shared today. We had a lot of interesting questions, so I think you might have people reaching out to you after the fact to get your views on these points. So thank you both.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Really enjoyed that.
Great chatting with you.
Thanks, Bindu.
Great.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you.
No problem. So Kari, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Kari, I think you're on mute.
Is this better?
Yes, it is.
There's my first Zoom slip. And thank you guys. That was a great session, starting all over again. It was really great to see how everything has now become so people-centric. And you've come away from that physical space, and so much more emphasis is put on people, productivity, what is employee satisfaction, and what that means to most employers, and how mental health is now playing a really key part in all of this. So it's really very thoughtful insights, and there's a lot to be shared. And I think that's a great segue also into our next session, where we talk about future of work, where we talk about, and I mean, it all fits into the redesigned workspace arena. And it's when we talk about customer satisfaction and we talk about the physical space, I think what was missing from your conversation there, which will be hopefully filled in the next session, would be equal opportunity. And I think once we address mental health, once we address productivity, and once we become more people-centric, I think it's only natural to now focus on equal opportunity, even though that's been the conversation that's been going on for a very long time. So it'd be very interesting to actually see how that evolves, and actually how we can build on where Jennifer, Joshua, and Bindu have left off, and how we can build that on with Ula and Ram, who've also joined us for the next session. I had a great conversation with both of them prior to today, and there's just so much to talk about there. And it's very interesting because both their works are so awe-inspiring. Ula is the head of ethics and code of conduct at Bank of Montreal, and I'm going to talk to her during the session and bring out all the work she does, because there's just no way to summarize that in any short way here. And Ula, I told you I was so inspired by the work you do. And Ram is the founder of Colaberry, and loves to talk about future of work. And also, it's very interesting, instead of just having that ongoing conversation, on how both of you are so actively involved in implementing the work. It's, equal opportunity, and we talk about diversity, we talk about inclusion, but what does that really mean when you actually have to implement that? And how do we achieve that? So it'd be great to actually get your insights on how the implementation and the achievement occurs through various, roles and responsibilities that you both undertake. Starting off with you, Ula, would love to see how, or hear your thoughts on how your role at Bank of Montreal has shaped, especially given the recent, turn of events this year, whether it be Me Too, whether it be Black Lives Matter. How does that change your outlook? And from a corporate stance, what has Bank of Montreal done to be part of that narrative?
Sure. So how it's changed my outlook. So my day-to-day role as Chief Ethics and Conduct Officer, I have the good fortune of being able to hear from employees about all manner of things that are concerning them. And specifically, the conversation around inclusion and around diversity is a very deep one, and it's a long one. BMO's been working in this space since the 90s, starting with gender, women. And even though my day-to-day work isn't specifically that, but hearing how people feel, hearing how employees are impacted and their day-to-day experience really influences what the organization does. And also, to be honest, from a code of conduct point of view and from a conduct point of view, you have people sometimes complaining that they're not feeling included, or that they aren't feeling valued, or that things are not working out for them. And I have to say, so that's always been there, the whole how am I being treated? But what changed was in the summertime with George Floyd and the resurgence of Black Lives Matter, and bringing it to the corporate conversation, bringing it front foremost, is the organization's reaction and the organization's willingness to very, very quickly figure out what this means and how can we support our employees. So the focus now is on, we do have representation goals that have been released. They're public. The goals are 2025 goals. So really that's kind of a long way away, and it doesn't necessarily help people in their everyday lives. So the question becomes, what can we do now? Like, what can I do in 15 minutes to make somebody feel included, valued, and want to actually remain within the organization, specifically for the Black subsegment, and in the US for Latino also, and in Canada for other areas too. So it's that laser sharp focus on the subsegments that we have never really done before overtly. That is something different that we have done since this past summer. And
you actually sit on an advisory council.
I do. So one of the things, the representation goals are great and they're important, but it's execution. So how is that going to actually work? Like, what is going to be different? So as part of the overall strategy, the CEO created a Black and Latino advisory council, and it's north-south. So it's senior leaders from US and Canada for now, focused on those segments and focused on action and execution and what's happening. And the interesting thing is, like, I've sat on many, many councils in like where it's a big corporation. This one, I have to say right now, is working with such pace. We meet monthly, and the expectation is that when you show up for these meetings, that you were there. They're virtual, so cameras on, and you are reporting back monthly what is happening. So it's very action oriented. And again, the representation goals are there, but it's really focused on what are we doing in the organization now for employees so that they feel engaged and they have a good experience and they actually stay with us.
That's incredible. But, and that actually fits in so well with what Rom does, because while you're talking about employee engagement and, with the speed of action that everything is implemented, Rom's actually on the back end, reskilling and upskilling to be placed into the right places. And Rom, I'll let you expand on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Carrie. Ula, it's a pleasure sharing the panel with you. I come from an engineering background, and I started going on the path of training and providing career pathways for people of diversity as a way to give back for everything that I received. And we started doing that in around 2012, and it was when we started doing it, I was discouraged to be a for-profit company. And I was told that multiple times that I should be a nonprofit, right? So I stuck to my guns and I started developing a for-profit company. And along the way, there are several lessons learned. So one of the big lessons that I learned is the large organizations have actually bigger walls, or they have more hoops for people to cross to actually do career transitions. In a way, the large organizations, when with their huge human resource teams and supply chain teams and several regulations, probably for the right reasons that were true, that were relevant at one point of time, but they have created a difficult path for people to transition and get into good paying careers. So when I say good paying careers, my interest really is how do we help people get into careers that not just dead-end jobs, right? So, and from my perspective, looking at the future of work and how the work of the future in future of work looks like is people with having the capability to do lifelong learning plus human skills. These two are really important. So, and in that space, when we start working with the people on the other side of the track who doesn't have traditional degrees, are maybe high school educated, the number of hoops that they have to jump to get into good paying jobs is extremely large. But what we have seen is the small and medium businesses are more open for something like this, and it's really good to see that with the latest change in policies, large corporations are opening up, and I hope that large corporations actually open up their not only policies, right, human resources policies, not only policies, but also their hiring decisions and purchasing decisions. When I say hiring decisions and purchasing decisions, a lot of times, especially when you look in United States and North America, the hiring and purchase, I'm sorry. Hey. I'm so sorry. My son came advocating for his sister. Anyway, beyond the policies, they need to put it into action. They put it into action by putting their dollars behind it. When I say dollars behind it, a lot of times the hiring decisions and purchasing decisions are done by supply chain departments, purchasing departments, and the actual hiring managers on the ground. They should be empowered, and instead of looking at the quarter-to-quarter results, they should be empowered to actually make the long-term decisions and to bring diversity and inclusivity in their teams. So that's that needs to happen, and I hope. And I hope it's a new shift in the thought process that I'm hoping to see. More and more decisions will be made based on inclusivity and diversity as the core need.
Well, that's very interesting you say that, especially when when you focus more on the larger corporations. Boston Consulting Group did a study where they found that companies that have more diverse management teams have 19% higher revenues. And Ula, just to throw this out to you, what do you think, or why do you think large corporations are still hesitant and lagging in adopting equal opportunity for all?
I don't know that they're hesitant and lagging, that they're actively. So when I hear you say that, I don't know that it's an active, conscious decision that I will not adopt.
That I agree with, actually. Yes.
I think I get that.
What is the struggle then?
Perception. The struggle is likely that it's easier to hire people that you know. And this speaks to access and pipeline and privilege and all those other elements, right? So it's easier to hire people that you know because you know what you're going to get. They know you. You guys think the same way. Like you think the same way, and it's almost a lazy way of doing it. And so in that way, and when you go back to gender, it used to be that it was the old boys club, right? And then now you go back to race, and it's people that look the same. And in corporate settings, it's mainly white. So with that being said, it just takes a bit of consciousness to recognize that you don't know what you don't know, and to look beyond the easy piece and to be deliberate. So, and I'm going to come back to the goals that BMO has and that a lot of companies, it's not just BMO actually, the Black North Initiative is a Canadian run organization, and I think there's like 250 CEOs of large companies across from academia to healthcare to corporate life that have signed on to this commitment to actually increase senior ranks. And by signing on to this commitment and then taking a pledge, it forces you to actually report back how it's working. So by having goals, it's just like any other business metric. It's a performance metric, and it's not a quota. It's not affirmative action. It's actually, this is just how we're going to run the business. And then it just forces you to think and to be a bit more conscious about where the gaps are. Yeah, so the change. And you just have to now, because you're going to be measured against these metrics, whatever they are.
Absolutely. And so sorry, go on.
No, that's it. I think that's what the issue is. It's a lack of consciousness about what was happening.
And I mean, some time ago, the conversation was that, yes, we need to do this. Yes, we need to do this. And there was a lot of deliberation. And we're at a point right now where it's, like this should have been done yesterday. And it's no longer a time of, it's no longer a time if we should do this. It's more like how and when this should be done now. And from the other side of the coin, Ram, how do you feel, or what is your perception or perspective when dealing with larger corporations and retraining, upskilling the students or someone in mid-career change or veterans? What is your experience placing them in larger corporations?
Ram, you're on mute.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So as a small company, like, which is trying to help people transition into good paying jobs, we try to we try to work through, okay, what are the ways that we can help people position themselves so that they can get hired. So a key one of the narratives that is developing and working in the marketplace is hire for skills, right? So, and that narrative is helping people to change how they position themselves in the market and like get hired. And when also in the recent past, we are seeing organizations such as like Google, Facebook, and other organizations like trying to drop their qualification criteria. You don't need to have a degree for somebody to get hired into these corporations. So this type of culture is slowly starting to change, opening up the opportunity for people who are looking for jobs. And as a company, like, what we focus on is how can we empower people to go and pursue these jobs at small, medium, and large companies. So now, when the way we do that is we work on one side, on the supply side, we work on developing the skills that are necessary and help them certify in the skills through third-party certifications, technology certifications such as Microsoft, Oracle, Google, Tableau type of certifications. And these certifications signal the skill of the people to the hiring world, whether it's recruiters or whether it's hiring managers. They send signals, and these signals are allowing us to reach to a wider audience. So, but when working like directly with large corporations, we still have to go through several hoops, and also one of the challenges that we have is like, where do we fit in large corporations, and how does this supply chain or in general like hiring process works? When I say how does the hiring process works, there are various ways that large corporations does the talent sourcing. One is through human resources, and other is through third-party marketplace systems, which provides like staffing services type of thing, and the other is outsourcing services, outsourcing contracting services. So, and what the HR-driven hiring services, they are opening up a little bit more depending on the company policy, and the local, especially in North America, because of the changed hiring outlook and hiring practices, there is more and more marketplace recruiting opportunities are growing. When it's related to the outsourcing side of things, I would like to see more emphasis on impact sourcing, right? Impact sourcing around talent. We know that the impact sourcing is a very is being adapted across many companies, primarily to source products globally in an impactful way. But I think the impact sourcing could be done even for the talent, and if the organizations move towards having impact sourcing policies, making sure they are able to find the competency within their neighborhoods and competency in their underrepresented populations, that can be huge, because the dollars that goes into this, the sourcing activities are huge, and that can change how the how the talent landscape and how the hiring practices and how the diversity and inclusivity can be looked at. So one good important piece that Hula talked about is like the conscience, right? The conscience is changing. So For example, a few years ago, when we talked about global warming and renewable energy, a lot of we all thought that it's not possible. But once it was committed, now there are countries, there are several countries which are close to 100% renewable energy. Similarly, the organizations have to make this conscious decision of increasing their diversity and inclusivity, and that can change the game for underrepresented populations in large corporations, and also open up the pathways and opportunities that are required where people don't have to go through several hoops, but instead, like, there are direct pathways for good paying jobs.
Well, Ula, on that note, what are your thoughts on the impact sourcing and talent acquisition that's on that side?
Talent acquisition and impact sourcing. So the supplier side, you mean the third party? So that actually takes the same level of focus, right? So, and that's the representation goals that we have, and I don't want to harp on them, but it's actually 3 elements. So there's representation of our employees, but also focus on our suppliers and also communities. And then, so it is important to be making choices of people that aren't the obvious choices necessarily, or not the ones that you would always just turn to because it's easy. I also think, though, talent acquisition, that pipeline, we talk about the pipeline, and I can't remember, it's just evading me now, but there was I might have even been Wells Fargo, and the CEO said that there just wasn't enough diversity to fill the ranks, right? Mm-hmm. And that he had to walk that back very, very quickly, and it's not good, and it's not true. And, we have these conversations about qualifications and about credentials and about experience and ability. And while there is some truth to, you need to have people that are experienced in whatever roles that you're putting them into, there's no excuse for not having developed that experience within your company from the beginning. So that speaks to what Ram's speaking about in terms of acquisition, talent acquisition and the pipeline. And then once people get hired, there's still a lot of work to do, because it's actually not that hard to find BIPOC people to bring into your company, I have to say. The challenge is keeping them there through the time that it's going to take for them to learn the business, learn what they need to do, and to become fully functioning employees. And with that in mind, that's really where companies can actually spend a bit of time figuring out what's important, listening, and that value proposition, because the war for talent is actually real. And then we're seeing it even now more. When I just listened to the other session, and we know in our organization that because now people have been working remotely for 7 months, whatever it is, 7 or 8 months, it doesn't matter where you live. You can work anywhere. So we have people recruiting people from us that can be in Europe, can be in the Bahamas, can be in the US. It doesn't matter anymore. So the bestest and brightest can go anywhere. So if you want to really be serious about this, it's not helpful for your organization to parachute in senior leaders on top of people that have already been there. So how do you develop people? How do you make sure that they're part of the organization and that they want to stay there? And so it's constant work. You're basically working on all cylinders all the time. And it's not just hiring. Hiring is important, but you have to keep them in the company.
Retention is the most important, I think. Also, yes, you're completely right. And you just touched on from the previous session, and you talk about a diverse workplace and how so many changes are happening because of this pandemic, even more now. So what do you do to make the diverse community more welcome at a workplace? And it's just not about also making them feel welcomed, making them feel included. It's the existing diverse employee base that you have. It's an ongoing conversation to ensure that they're also doing all right. And when we spoke prior to this session, you had mentioned on how you reach out to your team. Your team spans globally, and you said it's a very healthy representation on your team. And so what are the steps you take to make sure that they are not just felt welcomed, but also felt cared for on an ongoing basis?
So the whole thing about being cared for is something from an organizational point of view that there's the racial aspect to it, but it's just we're in a pandemic. Mm-hmm. So everybody's on edge. It's not good. It's difficult. People are working. I mean, Ram's speaking at a conference and his child's in the frame and he's trying to deal with that, and you're trying to be serious, but you hear stuff behind, and that's how we're all working, and it's hard. Mm-hmm. And then you have the added issue about school and caregivers and elderly, and anyway, it's just very challenging. So as an organization, I think our first check-in to employees was started in March. So probably by April, we started to ask people, how are they feeling? What is going on through various surveys? And then we actually used there is science that shows that when employees are feeling optimistic, that actually translates to a more resilient workforce. Mm-hmm. So that resilience is important for a high performance culture. So all of those things connect. So we were checking in, frequently and regularly. How are you feeling? And the how are you feeling at first, it was interesting because some leaders are like, well, what am I doing? What can I do with that? Like, they're sitting in their homes. I can't help how they're feeling. But it's not about that. It isn't about finding childcare for somebody. It's just getting a sense of their mental space, basically. And then in elements where people were not doing well, where the little survey says that you're not doing well, then it's supporting those leaders and having conversations and showing them how they can connect. Then you layer on everything that happened in the summer, and then it's a specific conversation for your BIPOC employees and your colleagues. But there's a balance there, because you don't want to over-index on the how are you feeling, because every time that you bring it up, you could create more trauma in the fact that, yes, I'm not feeling good. So you have to, and it's actually, I tell a story. I have a teenager, and I've had to learn through this pandemic and through this whole thing about how not to be how are you, but to kind of stand back and say, I'm here. When things aren't going well, I'm going to be here for you. And that's the messaging that we are giving leaders the empowerment to do with their teams too. So you check in, but you don't have to check in every single time, but you just have to make yourself available for when people do need to speak. And it's hard. Not everybody wants to talk about their personal stuff. It's do
you think this dialogue will be permanent even post-pandemic?
What?
Do you think this dialogue that has started because of the lockdown, do you think it's here to stay? Do you think it'll be permanent seemingly when things go back to normal?
For our company, it kind of has to be, because we have work to do on many fronts, and the way that you're going to have lasting cultural change and lasting cultural, optimism, resilience, high performance, all of those things that sound like business speak but are actually really important, is to keep it going. So we can't say that we're in this situation that happened under crisis and all of a sudden crisis gone, vaccine here, we're going to go back to the old way of operating. That doesn't make any sense. And that might actually be more detrimental than just changing the way that we do things.
Ron, during this pandemic, have you seen many people look for a career change? Have you seen an uptick in people wanting to reskill and upskill?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because prior to the pandemic as well, we were having the conversations about future of work, and how it's going to add like big bottom line to businesses through automation. And how millions of people are going to lose jobs, and how we need to worry about reskilling them and upskilling them, right? And the pandemic kind of brought that future like forward. Right now, we already lost millions of people lost jobs, right? And the work is remote, right? Which is future of work. It's here, right? And the leap that we are expecting in the upskilling, reskilling that could happen over the next few years is basically like there is no infrastructure around it, right? So we are in this space where the idea of automation by large, not just large, like small, large, all businesses is like front and center, right? So that's like the biggest thing. How do we do more with less, and can we make sure enough people working from home, and how can we deploy technologies to help them work less and business do more, right? So
Ram, I'm gonna hold you. I'm gonna sort of interject you on that thought because we have to get into questions. But I think what you've just started might actually answer one of the questions. So I'm gonna come right back to you there. But I think, Ulla, this might be more towards you, where one of the questions is, do you think that working on eliminating bias at the top level is the answer, solving the problem at the root, or do we need to proactively be putting in hard quotas, et cetera? And you and I had a conversation about this, about the quota especially. So over to you.
Do I think that eliminating bias at the top, or do we need to be? So again, the quota, yeah, I think you have to work at all levels. You have to work at all parts of the actual system. Hard quota, you mean if the question is a quota that you must do this, then that will probably not be sustainable in the long run. But if you do something that you have performance goals, that your goals are that you want to see this percentage and this proportion, then underpinning those goals should be processes that people that actually give the ability to unearth the best talent possible.
So how do you distinguish a quota and a performance goal here?
Well, let's say you have a revenue goal of 30% increase in sales. Nobody ever challenges that kind of performance goal, that kind of performance metric. So by saying, for instance, that we want to have 3.5% Black senior leaders in Canada within 4 years, that's the same kind of metric as a performance metric, right? And then the difference is the quota is you must hire this person. So like A versus B, whereas having like a goal that spans 2 or 3 years gives you the ability to do what is best from an organizational point of view, but also keeping in mind that this is the goal that you're working towards. So that's how I see it differently.
That's very interesting because I remember talking to you and saying, you know, all the egalitarians out there may have an objection to that.
Yeah, and there is going to be cause for people to say that it's discriminatory, but it's the same thing when you had gender goals. And the reality is we're talking about 3.5% of Black senior leaders by 2025. That means there's 97% that aren't, right? And so you're not going to have this mass turnover of like the pendulum's not going to swing on its head basically, but you have to actually start somewhere and be a little bit specific on where you want to see change.
And then how do you manage things if top management aren't interested in improving the culture to foster diversity, inclusion, and belonging? I guess I'll open this up to the both of you.
So let me just finish on that piece. So because in our case, these are performance goals, they are being evaluated in our performance management committee. So they're going to be on the same sheet as your revenue goals and your expense goals and your productivity. So you just measure it. You measure it and you hold people accountable for it. And if they don't meet their goals, then there's consequences to that.
I mean, yeah, that's a great way to actually hold them accountable for this. And Ram, on your side, have you any thoughts on how do you manage things if top management aren't interested?
How do you manage things that top management are in? So I think the important thing to recognize is representation is a must. It's not whether somebody is interested or not, it's a must. And it's as a society, we need to look at it that way. So one of the observations and the test that we did is around the idea of if you don't see it, you can't be it, right? So, and we worked on like changing that paradigm, and as part of our programs, we very deliberately bring successful people of color into our programs so that people can talk to them and understand the path that they went on, right? So in a way, what we are trying to do is create these pathways for success, and also when you create these pathways for success and the top management like start seeing the results, their approach would start shifting. It's not a should we do it, or should they consider, oh, they might not like it. It's not like it's a fundamental thing. Like Ula was earlier saying that when the diversity in the top management is there, it's good for the entire business. So it adds to the bottom line. It's not a good to have thing. It's pretty much like a must have thing. So we should I think get rid of the idea of, okay, top management doesn't like it, to, hey, it's a business imperative and we should go for it.
One final question. What is the right approach for employers in reaching out to their employees who may be impacted by the death of George Floyd, by what's going on in Nigeria, et cetera?
Yeah, so it's my father's Nigerian, so I have an interest, an interesting. It's horrible. I think you got to watch how you reach out, and there's not one size fits all. It depends on what's important for the individual. And I think regardless, if you start by listening and educating yourself about all these things, there's so many things in all these countries, so in multiple African countries even. Mm-hmm. As a leader, I think it's figuring out where the impacts are. And the way you'll do that is with an ongoing relationship and that ongoing ability to have conversations. So maybe your employees can actually tell you what is going on and what is bothering them. And you got to figure out the right touch. You don't want it to be too heavy, but you don't want it to be nothing either. So there's something in between. And actually, to be honest, I have a bunch of friends who have said to me, I don't get this, and that's okay. That's fair. That's truthful and that's transparent. And let's just talk about it. Right. And it's just being not trying to overswing, and just being clear about what you understand and what you don't. Mm-hmm. And just starting there. And it's just like anything else. It's just being open.
Any parting words of wisdom before we call this session an end?
I think just to be transparent and empathetic. And if you're not sure what to say, start with saying, I don't know what to say, but I want to say something. And actually, on that last one, there was one friend of mine out there on the Thursday that the George Floyd week. She sent me a text and said, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. This is horrible. I just don't know what to do, but I'm reaching out to you. And that was great. That's all it took. So
fantastic. Ram, any parting words from you?
So in our organization, we have a significant presence of people of color. So when George Floyd happened, it was almost silence like the next day when we get on the call. And then we had simple private one-on-one conversations, and what we agreed upon is we are doing the work of providing career pathways to people, and what the larger conversations that are happening across the organizations and across the society is something that we are already addressing through our work. Mm-hmm. So just keep doing and just keep going and focus. So that's what as a company and team that we decided. And it was not a difficult conversation. It's being empathetic and believing in each other, and that we are doing right by ourselves and each other and the society.
That's great. Ron, sorry, I have to get you to. We'll have to take this offline. I hope everyone enjoyed this session. We're running a little over time over here, but it was just really incredible to actually hear Ram and Ula talk about this. It's so necessary, especially given the previous session we had. And this was the missing link to talk about everything required in the redesigned workspace and also equal opportunity for all. Please, everyone, click on the button on top of your screen and the virtual room to switch into Stream 1, because that's where we're going to be continuing the rest of this, the afternoon one. Thank you so much for being here.